Hello, good evening to this, and welcome to this live technique class. Today we're going to be looking at the famous 120 arpeggios by Giuliani. We're not going to be looking at all 120, but just a few. The idea of this class is not to go through the arpeggio patterns. Many of you will be familiar with those anyway, but rather to look at how you might go about practicing them and deriving the most benefit from them. So we're going to look at some basic aspects of right-hand arpeggio technique that can be developed using these arpeggios. And then we're going to look at a couple of creative ways of adapting the arpeggios, changing them slightly, for particular technical ends. So we're going to start now with by sharing the screen, so I can show you what we're gonna work on. So you should now see the first few arpeggios from Giuliani's 120. This, incidentally, is the first part of Giuliani's Opus 1. His Opus 1 is a collection of kind of technical exercises and etudes, well worth looking at. Part 1 looks at arpeggios. Part 2 kind of scales in, I mean, they're kind of etudes, but they're really interval scales, thirds and sixths and octaves and the like. And then parts 3 and 4, he actually has some little compositions that make excellent etudes. We're only going to be looking at part 1. But I thought it's worth mentioning because some people think that Giuliani's Opus 1 just consists of the 120, and that's not true. There's lots of good stuff in Opus 1. One further note about them before we start is that these etudes were featured in, or these, I shouldn't say etudes, but arpeggio exercises were featured in Scott Tennant's Pumping Nylon. So some of you may be familiar with them through that book, which is great. A great book, famous book, justly famous. So let's look at number 1. So I've just said we're going to be looking at arpeggios. Well, number 1 isn't an arpeggio. It's, well, block chords. The first chord, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the exercises, is C. He goes through it like this. And then he changes chord to this. It's a G7 chord in its first inversion with a B in the bass. So we've got a B on the 5th string, 2nd fret, then D on the 2nd string, 3rd fret, F on the 1st string, 1st fret. And that gives us this G7 chord in its first inversion. Then he goes through it like this. So the whole thing goes like this. In one sense, Giuliani is simply introducing the 120 because he uses those two chords throughout the arpeggios. In fact, it gets a little bit tedious hearing the tonic and dominant all the time, going backwards and forwards. But in those days, they tended to write technical exercises in what you might call a musical way, in a way that fitted with the standard tonic dominant tonal harmony of the time. It wouldn't have occurred to them to write a set of open string arpeggios, but you can, in fact, use just open strings to play these like this. So in a sense, that's the first creative adaptation that we can make. If you stick with just C and G7, you might end up with problems associated with repetitive strain injury because you're going between these block chords all the time. And I have come across cases of people who have been practicing these for big stretches of time without a break with those chords, and then running into problems with the left hand. The left hand is kind of worn out by that repetitive action. So it can be good to use just open strings. The other thing you can do is change the chords. You can use any chords you like. It's quite useful to use chords because when you press down with the left hand, you change very slightly the height of the strings. And of course, you need to be able to play arpeggios, or in this case, repeated chords, with the strings at different heights according to the notes we're pressing with the left hand. And so changing the chords can be useful. I mean, you might decide to go for an A7. To a D. And of course, you can change the bass notes as well. I kept the bass notes as written there. As I say, that's the first maybe creative adaptation. It's not so much to develop technique, but to avoid technical problems such as repetitive strain and injury. But it does have the slight technical advantage of giving you different string heights. But if we stick in this class to the chords that are written, just for kind of unity, so anybody watching the class can be doing the same thing. I'd like to think of this number 1 as being more than simply an introduction to the 120 exercises. There's a lot that you can get from practicing just these repeated chords. When you're practicing repeated chords, and in fact, in the arpeggios, the so-called arpeggios, there are sections which deal pretty much just with repeated chords. They're not really arpeggios. So it's really, I'm calling them arpeggios. It's really just right hand patterns, right hand exercises. So this is the first of the repeated chord exercises. And what I'm going to say here can be applied to the sections which deal with repeated chords, even though we're not going to look at those sections in this class. And the first thing we want to address with repeated chords is chordal balance. Now, there are various ways you can, various things you can aim for with chordal balance. The first way is to have every voice sounding at an equal volume with a consistent tonal quality. So that would be like this. There's a sense of balance in the chords. And that's no easy thing to achieve. Our fingers all have different strengths, they're different lengths. The thumb is very heavy with a great big muscle. The middle finger is obviously quite strong. It's the longest finger. And to really balance the chord is a great and quite a difficult thing to do, but a very important skill to attain for guitar playing. Pianists have to do it as well. So chordal balance, the first thing, and if we stick with chordal balance for a bit, we can look at the other types of balance that we might want to be able to do, such as bringing out particular voices. And if you're watching this class back after it's been done live, you can feel free, of course, to pause at any time and try these things for yourself. If you're watching live, I don't want to spend too much time kind of stopping. This is, let's get you going with this stuff, and of course you can try it on your own later. So the first different balance I'd like to try is emphasizing the thumb, which is maybe the easiest one. So that's bringing out the bass, obviously. as I say, for many people, quite easy. The thumb is very strong. It might not be easy if you're having problems with the thumb stroke or with the angle of attack with the thumb, or with the exact relationship between, or the exact balance between the flesh and the nail when going through the string. That might be something you can use this study or this exercise to work on. But if we go on for now, the next note I might want to bring out is the top one. Again, with these fingers, PIM, that's going to be not too difficult. The middle finger is naturally quite strong. Well worth doing, of course, because bringing out the melody is one of the most important skills for the right hand. After that, of course, is bringing out the middle line, the middle voice. And that's not something you would do as a rule when playing pieces. Very often you're bringing out usually the melody, sometimes the bass, the outer parts. But of course, in certain passages, it's really important to bring out the inner lines. If you think of a pianist like Vladimir Horowitz, he was a master of highlighting whatever part of the texture he wanted. He was able to bring out these middle voices. And as guitarists, we should have that skill as well. But it is the hardest, and your ear has to focus in a very intense way in order to bring it about, in order that your fingers will obey the thing that you hear in your mind. As with all these things, questions of chordal balance and the like, you've got to hear it in your head before you can produce it. You can't produce it unless you can imagine it. Imagination, crucial in playing music. You have to hear in your head what it is you want to achieve orally with your fingers. I'm going to try that now, bringing out the B string with the index finger. So already, even in number 1 of the 120 exercises, there's a lot we can get out of it. The next thing I'd like to suggest is that you don't stick only with Giuliani's fingerings. If you look closely at the music on the screen, you'll see these little dots. Some of you will know what they are, others might not, because today we only use P-I-M-A, the Spanish letters, or the first letters of the Spanish words for those fingers to describe the right hand. But in those days, of course, Giuliani, he was an Italian. He was very much working in Central Europe. He was in Austria and the like, and publishing in that part of the world. It would have made no sense to use to refer to the Spanish words. And they use a system of dots. And 1 dot refers to the index finger, 2 dots refers to the middle finger. So that's what those dots are. And I'm looking at a very early edition of this, which you can get on IMSLP very easily, totally legally, for free. It's well out of copyright. But you shouldn't just practice with those fingers. And a little bit of background to this before I do the exercise. I know I'm talking a lot, but hopefully this is informative and will help. In those days, again, many of you will know this, but in those days, the guitar was just coming out of a right-hand technique, which really was maybe derived, if you like, or prominent in lute playing. So if we think of Sohr's right hand, Sohr very rarely used the A finger. He only used it in 4-note chords, in fact. And so if you take a study like the B minor study, he uses his middle finger to play the melody, whether it's on the B string or the E string. The A finger is left out of it. Of course, you don't need to play it like that when you're playing it, but that's how Saw would have done it. The A finger was considered a weak finger, which it is. But in those days, and especially with the lute, and the same thing was very much the case in keyboard playing, the strong and weak fingers were used in a way that matched the musical intention. So, for example, in lute music, scales were played with P and I in alternation. The P being the thumb. The thumb is a heavy finger and was used on the strong beat. So if you imagine some semiquavers, the thumb would be playing 1 and 3 of the group of 4. The index finger playing 2 and 4. I was exaggerating for any lutenists watching. You would never want your scales to sound thuddy like that. But I'm just kind of exaggerating the effect for the class. When the thumb was playing a bass note and you had to alternate the fingers, the M finger played the strong notes because that's a stronger finger than the index finger. And a very similar thing was going on in keyboard playing as well, which may seem strange to us because the harpsichord, of course, is not an instrument in which you can give emphasis dynamically to a particular note. But this idea of the strong and weak fingers being kind of integrated or the music fitting, the way you finger the music fitting with the strong and weak fingers, that was very much a thing at that time. In the 19th century, there was very much a movement away from that. The way the music was developing, especially piano music, meant that the right hand fingers needed to be used in an equal way. They all had to be equally strong, equally capable. And so really training up the weaker side of the hand became necessary, this part of the hand. So that hopefully gives you some background as to why Giuliani maybe didn't mention using the A finger. He was just coming out of a period in which the use of the strong fingers was still very central to the technique of the instrument. But we should not be bound by that now, because the music we play now requires a kind of equality of strength and capability. So here would be the first exercise played with PMA. And again, with those fingers, we should practice emphasizing, so the thumb, now the A finger, now the middle finger. So we're treating those fingers equally to P, I, and M. Excuse me, just 1 minute. That will stop the class. Stopping for my laptop runs out of battery. Now, the next thing here is that we can also train the pinky. And that might seem strange to people watching because the pinky is not used in guitar technique. It's not used in pieces. We wouldn't be playing melodies with the pinky. Although there are some guitarists who do advocate training the pinky up to the same level as the other fingers. It's not entered the mainstream yet by any means. However, there are benefits to training the pinky in that it balances the right hand. So if you think of the left hand, we use the pinky, and so that side of the hand, which is naturally weak, although it has a great big muscle here, but it's kind of underdeveloped usually in most hands, but that gets developed as a guitarist. So we develop a balance in the hand. And a pianist, of course, is using, they call it finger 5, what we call finger 4. They are using all of the fingers equally, so that the outer hand gets strengthened. Guitarists, obviously, we're not using the pinky, so the outer hand remains a bit weak, and the A finger is what suffers from this. And so you can rebalance the hand by training the pinky, even though you're not going to use it in pieces as such. And you'll find that if you do that, things like arpeggios, tremolo, these sorts of things become better, even though you're not using the pinky in those areas of technique. So if I show you what I would do, and don't worry about the tone. At least I don't worry about the tone I produce with the pinky. My nail's quite long for doing strumming stuff. And if your pinky's short like mine, I would say not to worry too much about adjusting the hand a little bit. The point is that you're using it, training the outer part of the hand. So that's the final point I want to make about number 1 in Giuliani's right hand technique. So we're going to go now on to number 2, the first arpeggio. And for this, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And I'm going to add a close-up of my right hand. In fact, I'm going to try and make my right hand larger. And so what I want to look at here is planting technique. If you've read Pumping Nylon by Scott Tennant, you'll be familiar with planting technique, or you've maybe come across it elsewhere. The planting technique is having the fingers ready on the strings before they play. And there are a few different ways you can do that, but the main categories are the full plant and the sequential plant. At least that's how Scott Tennant describes it in Pumping Nylon. The full plant is when we put all of the fingers that we're going to use on the string in advance, like this. So you see I've got my thumb, my index finger, my middle finger, and the A finger, the ring finger, on the strings, and then I play one at a time. And the thumb doesn't go back on, but these fingers are still on. Then I play the index. Index doesn't go back on. It is resetting, you notice. You should get into the habit of doing that. But it's not going back on the string. Thumb's still free. Middle finger. Again, middle finger doesn't go back on. Now the A finger is the only finger on. And then the A finger. So all the fingers on the strings and then playing one at a time. You can try that if you want. It may be something that you can do very well already. It's a technique that's always worth revisiting and strengthening. So that's a full plant, and it tends to be used in arpeggios that are ascending, going from the bass towards the highest string. In descending arpeggios, a full plant doesn't work so well. You can try it now. Put those fingers on the strings again, and then try starting with the A finger. Kind of works at that speed. Fast though, the fingers tend to start tripping over one another. And the solution for that is to use something known as a sequential plant. And that's when we're still preparing the fingers on the strings in advance of playing them, but we're doing so one at a time. So the A finger plays, none of the fingers are planted, the A finger plays, and we prepare the middle finger immediately. The middle finger plays, and we prepare the index finger immediately. The index finger plays, and we play the thumb, or prepare the thumb immediately. So they're being prepared or planted in sequence. So let me do that again, slowly, without speaking, so you can just see what's going on. see at the end, I prepared my A finger again, because the arpeggio is going to start again, and we want that finger ready to go. So that's sequential planting. A lot of people find in sequential planting that it feels awkward for a start. And so a really good exercise is to practice the fingers individually. You'll probably find that the index finger to the thumb works all right, or works a bit easier. Maybe you still need to work on it though. Everybody's different. We've all got different strengths and weaknesses. But you might find that going from finger to finger is more difficult. So practice going from M to I. Just like that. You play the M, nothing's planted for a start. As soon as you play the M, the I prepares on the next string, the next lower string. Like that. And then maybe even harder than that is to go from A to M. And that makes a great exercise on its own. And if you find that you can't do that, it's worth persevering with this before going any further with the arpeggios. Just getting the planting technique sorted. And you can even, of course, practice the pinky to the A finger. Although it's not quite so important, because you're not really going to be using that in a piece of music. So that is planting technique. I'm going to try and keep the close-up on the screen if possible, and now go to share screen again. Okay, so let's look at number 2. We're not going to use the A finger for a start. We're going to just use Giuliani's fingerings of P, I, M. And we're going to use, for a start, a full plant. Okay, we've got that far. That worked with a full plant. What do we do with this note, the next bass note? That is not part of the full plant. We could just do a full plant again, but I'm going to try and explain why that doesn't work. So if we have a full plant of 3 fingers, the 3 fingers we're using, play through, and then just fully plant again. That works very nicely at this tempo. But as soon as we go fast, you're going to have a galloping arpeggio and a bouncing right hand. 2 things that you don't want at all. You lose control doing that. You're going to feel like you're riding a horse. What you've got to do is think of the 3rd note of the bar, the E, this E, to the 4th note of the bar, or maybe another way, the last note of the triplet arpeggio to the 1st note of the next triplet arpeggio. You need to think of that as an arpeggio in itself. And you notice that going from this E, that string of E, to the D string, happens to be the note of E because I'm pressing it, you notice that that's a descending arpeggio. So that little bit of this ascending arpeggio exercise is actually a descending arpeggio. So we've got between each triplet, we have a descending arpeggio. And for that, you should sequentially plant the thumb. So you sequentially plant the thumb after the 3rd note. So we've got a full plant, all 3 fingers. and then a sequential plant of the thumb. Hello. Nice to see you here. Fantastic. Wonderful. Okay, so sequential plant. And that means, of course, the thumb is planted, but the fingers are not. So we lose the full plant over 3 notes. But we can still do a full plant of I and M. So the thumb is already planted, we play it, then we plant I and M. So we're sequentially planting, or sequentially preparing a full plant on 2 notes. So really, we're only doing a full plant over 3 notes in the first one. And then it's the thumb sequentially planted, and then I and M sequentially planted. If that makes sense. And that means when we speed up, we're going to be able to do it in a very controlled way without a bouncing hand. Okay, if you'd like to try that along with me, let's do it now. I'm going to count I'm going to give you a count in triplets, so we keep it very slow so you can focus on the planting. So 1, 2, 3. Always sequentially planting the thumb, then sequentially planting I and M. We'll do it again. Okay, so I hope that kind of makes sense, and can use the same technique on triads. Well, we use the technique. We think of the technique not in terms of triads in the harmonic sense of a triad, which is the 3 notes that make up a chord, but we're thinking of this in terms of the strings we're playing on. It's more a physical action on something physical, the strings. So I think that's a better way to think of it. But that's a good question. I hope that kind of answers the question. Do fire another one if I've kind of missed what you were asking there. Now, obviously, we want to practice with the other fingers as well. As I said before, Giuliani has these only for PIM with the dot system that he used at that time. But we don't want to leave out the other fingers and leave the outer part of the hand weak. So let's try it now with PMA, the same exercise and the same planting technique. Full plant for a start, then the thumb is sequentially planted for the rest of the time. And again, we can do the same thing with P, A, C. If you like, some people call it E, the pinky. 1, 2, 3. And try and use the same planting technique with the A finger and the pinky being planted together. And as I said before, don't worry about the tone you're producing with the pinky. It's not about that. You should try and produce a strong sound in volume, but I wouldn't worry about the quality. If it sounds tinny, I certainly don't worry about that. when using the pinky, because I'm not going to be using it, as I said, in pieces. Okay, so we've got number 2 um, done now. So we've got another question. Do all the notes get equal measure, or a note may get more hits? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. I mean, what I'm doing is just playing the notes that are written. So we've got 3 notes per beat, and they're all played one. I'm not going to be repeating any notes within those three notes per beat. Again, if I haven't quite addressed what you were meaning there, then do fire another question. As I said earlier in the class when I was addressing number 1, chordal balance, what we're doing there is emphasizing certain notes over others, developing the skill to emphasize the bass over the melody, emphasize the melody over the bass, emphasize the middle note over the other two, and the like. But in the arpeggio, we're not quite doing that. If we look now at number 3, we're going to be using much more sequential planting, because apart from the first 2 notes, which could be fully planted, the arpeggio is a descending one. Again, at the start of each triplet, we have that brief ascending arpeggio, the bass to the highest treble note. But you can actually, as maybe a secret that a lot of people are unaware of, you can always use a sequential plant, regardless of whether the arpeggio is ascending or descending. It's just that you can't really use a full plant in a descending arpeggio, if that makes sense. So full plant for ascending arpeggios only, sequential plant can be used for both. And so in an arpeggio like this, which is primarily descending, I would just stick with sequential planting throughout, with the exception of maybe the very first 2 notes. So let's try it now. Back to PIM, or PMI as it is in this one. So always just preparing after the previous note immediately. And you can go back to earlier in the video to see how to practice that if you're not able to do it just now. And let's do the same with PAM. 1, 2, 3. And with P, C or E, A. 1, 2, 3. And obviously you should practice them much more than that, repeat them much more. But this is obviously just to get you going and give you some ideas of how to go about it. Okay, so we've covered those arpeggios and we've covered planting technique. Now, how else could we go about using these arpeggios in a creative way? Well, one thing that Giuliani doesn't mention is the use of appoggiando. And that's maybe because the way we use appoggiando now is quite different. The way it developed with the Tarrega school is quite different from how it may have been used in Giuliani's time, where they'd have used a lot of appoggiando in the thumb, perhaps, but possibly none, actually, in the fingers. Some experts in the period might be able to help clarify those things. But certainly a very different approach to appoggiando to the Tarrega school, which has kind of been used ever since. But we do want to be able to use apoyando at will, as it were. Have the control to use it when we want to use it. So we're going to go back to number 2 now. We're going to try and keep the planting going. If you can't just now, when following around, don't worry. Obviously, go back to the practice room, sort it there. But we're now going to use apoyando in the thumb. We're going to play that number 2 again, but the thumb is now going to be apoyando or rest stroke. So that's when we play the string and fall into the next string, like that. Let's try it now. 1, 2, 3. We can't do it on the 3rd string because we're going to be playing a note on the 2nd string immediately after. So we're only doing it on strings 5 and 4. Clearly visible. Sorry about that. On my screen, I can see everything. So I'm sorry that's not coming through. Let me remove the music for now. Hopefully you've got those 2 chords going, and hopefully you can now see everything. So I'll do the same maybe with the next arpeggio, number 3. So that's apoyando with the thumb. We can also use apoyando with one of the fingers. For example, the M finger in this. If we go back to number 2, so the thumb's now free stroke. 1, 2, 3. And we should be able to do that in a very natural way. One note, or one thing to remember with the thumb, is that we don't want to be changing the hand position to suit the thumb. So we can't have a hand position like this for everything else, and then when we need to use apoyando in the thumb, we go like this because it's comfortable. We've got to be able to do apoyando with a normal hand position. We're not going to have time to go like that. Yeah. So that's just a side note, but I thought it was worth mentioning because I've seen that with a lot of people trying to change the hand position for the thumb. So that's another creative way we can go about those arpeggios. I'm going to share the screen again. Do just let me know if you can't see anything that you need to see. I'm going to go now to 81. They're in a slightly funny order, these arpeggios, and Scott Tennant in Pumping Nylon actually changed the order, which was maybe quite a good idea. 81. Now, I've heard it. In fact, I read this Douglas Need's page, really well worth checking out. He has a lot of great technical tips and things there. But a few years ago, I was reading through his page. He was covering arpeggios, and he mentioned that this arpeggio, which is number 81 in the Giuliani, I'm not sure he necessarily referred to the Giuliani, just this particular pattern. And the next one, which is 82, if you get those really good in your arpeggio practice, you'll be able to play most arpeggios, because most arpeggios, his contention at least, is that most arpeggios is made up of a combination of those two, provided, of course, that you practice with all of the different fingering patterns and not just with P, I, M. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Everything that I've said so far regarding planting, practicing apoyando and the like can be applied to these arpeggios. I mean, it can be applied to most arpeggios. But I want to look at another creative way of adapting these arpeggios for a particular purpose. Let me play through the two arpeggios for a start. So number 81 is number 82 is now if you want to practice splayed fingering, and by splayed fingering I mean when you're going to separate these fingers by having them play on non-adjacent strings. So rather than on strings 1 and 2, they're going to be on strings 3 and 1, or on strings 4 and 1, or even on strings 5 and 1. And we can adapt the exercises to that end. So if you look at number 81, we're playing for a start on strings 5, 2, and 1. So we've got another question. What if you play a note at the same time for thumb and A finger? So playing thumb and A finger at the same time. Well, you do have to do that, obviously, sometimes. Not in these particular arpeggios that we're covering. There are some arpeggios in the 120 that do deal with that. But maybe you could expand on what you said and let me know what the difficulty is with that, and I will try and address it. But back to splayed fingering, it's a good question, but do let me know in a bit more detail what the gist of the question is. So rather than playing just on strings 5, 2, and 1, we're going to move the index finger to string 3. The middle finger is going to stay on string 2. Now, obviously, the bass line has to change a little bit. Our thumb can't get onto the 3rd string because our index finger is playing there. So we adapt the bass line to suit by just going like this. We can go even further. We can put the index finger on the 4th string, in which case the bass note just stays the same. And that's a nice spacing to practice. We can combine all of those spacings by moving the index finger through the strings, like this. So that's index string 2, string 3, string 4, string 3, string 2, string 3, string 4, string 3, back to string 2. We can jump from string 2 to string 4. Making sure the hand stays stable. And of course, we're going to go on and practice those things with the other fingering combinations, especially M and A, which actually do need a little bit of extra time spent on developing independence. And the splayed fingerings is a great way of developing the independence of those fingers. So if I just show you that, now it's as written with P, M, A. Now I'm going to put the M finger on the 3rd string. Now on the D string. And of course, we can go through what I did with the other fingerings as well. I'll just say that a really good thing if you're practicing with those two fingers is actually to now that our M finger is on the 4th string, take the A finger to the 3rd string, and now practice the arpeggio by moving the A finger up and down the strings. So we're practicing this movement and developing the ability to do that in a way which keeps the hand steady and stable. One last point about how to practice these. For speed, you need to be able to do them accurately and with a good tone, all the rest of it. And for that, you want to start slow and gradually speed up. Use a metronome. It's very useful. But a really good way to go about it as well. I mean, these are complementary. Both should be used. It's not either or. You should use speed bursts to kind of test yourself. So, for example, and so on. It's a suggestion, but I find really good, and you often discover where your upper limit is when doing that. So hopefully that's a good introduction to the 120 of Giuliani. We only, of course, touched 5 of them, so there's 115 to go. But you can, of course, apply everything I said to most of the other exercises. So thanks very much for watching this live stream. Now, just a note on these live stream technique classes. This is actually going to be the last of the YouTube live classes. There is going to be a recorded class going out at a pre-recorded class going out at the same time. But of course, that will mean no comments interaction. And if you do, I am going to be continuing live classes, but they're going to be happening on Zoom. So if you are interested in coming to the live technique classes on Zoom, then do drop me a line at info@ianwattguitar.com. So that's info@ianwattguitar.com, and I'll put a link to that below the video later on if it isn't there already. You can get access to those classes by joining Patreon. So there's going to be 2 such live classes per month, and if you want to be part of them, well, get in touch. But you can do it very quickly by going to my Patreon page, and it's just £6.99 in pounds, £6.99 per month. That's the price of that just now, and there's going to also be some other stuff going on there, and there is other content there already. So thanks very much for tuning in. As I mentioned, Patreon is a great way to support this content and to participate in it. If you want to support it in a kind of one-off way, you can also do so at buymeacoffee.com/IanWattGuitar. So it's patreon.com/IanWattGuitar or buymeacoffee.com/IanWattGuitar. But until next time, and you'll see we've had company. Sorry about the odd extra noise in the background, but for 6 years old, he's pretty good. But until next time, either a pre-recorded class on YouTube, or maybe I'll see you on some of the Zoom classes via Patreon. All the best. Is it?